So my name is Rachel. I'm a UX designer on Google Chrome, and I care a lot about making things that are important easier to use. I've been thinking a lot about users in emerging markets for the past 18 months to 2 years, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about them today. Fortunately for me, Bruce has done a lot of the hard work of explaining to you why thinking about emerging markets is so important. So I'm not going to go too deeply into that. I'm just going to touch on 2 key points to start. Earlier this year, Mary Meeker released the Internet Trends Report, and she said that the growth of global Internet users is flat. In fact, if you exclude India, it's decelerating. But if you look at India alone, the growth rate is accelerating dramatically. And in fact, India became the second largest market for Internet users last year, after China, and surpassing the United States. So my first point is that the growth of our industry is in emerging markets. My second point is about this. McKinsey measured the economic impact of a mature internet market. And they found that with simulations that over a period of 15 years, an increase in internet maturity creates an increase in real GDP per capita of $500. The Industrial Revolution took 50 years to achieve the same results. If you're a designer or a developer because you want to make the world a more equitable place, then this is where you need to be. But what if you're a business which explicitly targets local users? Well, I have an answer for you as well. New users from emerging markets are overwhelmingly mobile first and often mobile only. Mobile first and mobile only usage is a growing trend in the US and the UK and a lot of markets that you're already looking at. And it comes with many of the same challenges we come to expect from users in emerging markets. Ofcom's Smartphone by Default report found that 16% of people in the UK access the web primarily or only via smartphone. The US Census Bureau found that 20% of households are using only cell data to access the internet. Only cell data. And GSMA's Mobile Economy report says that 60% of global connections are over 2G. Mobile-first users are everywhere, and we're failing to meet their needs. We've learned this lesson firsthand in Chrome. Chrome for Android was designed in 2012, at the moment when Chrome on desktop was just beginning to surpass Internet Explorer as the largest browser. But things have changed a lot since then. In 2015, we conducted research to see how mobile-first users were engaging with the web through Chrome. And we found that these users are facing a lot of challenges. Even worse, we're all desktop-first users as designers and developers and even product managers. So it's very hard for us to be aware of our assumptions. These assumptions manifest in our products and make them inaccessible for mobile-first users. So first, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the kind of research that we've conducted, so you guys can get a picture of how that looks. Then I'm going to start talking about some of the principles I've been developing to help design for users in emerging markets that I hope everyone can benefit from. So in early 2015, we took 16 people across UX, engineering, and product management to 4 different cities in Maharashtra and West Bengal. Over the course of 3 weeks, we worked in small teams to conduct 80 intercept interviews, 26 in-home interviews, and 8 visits to local vendors to have conversations and see what the buying process looked like. We analyzed our data in the field and weighed it with a literature study and diary studies conducted by our research teams. I want to share one of the user stories we saw over the course of the research. This is Rupa. She's a mother of 2 living in a very small village, and she bought a smartphone about 6 months ago. Of course, it doesn't have a data plan, and her main information need is finding study materials for her 2 school-aged children. She herself doesn't speak English, but is often looking for English study materials for them. So it can be very hard for her to find what she's looking for. Her solution to this is to bring her phone to the university where she works, and she has her colleague download those study materials on his device. Then he uses Zender, which is a file transfer app, to send those files over to her phone, and she brings those home so her children can study. This is how Rupa uses the internet. There's a few other learnings I want to share from the research. I'll just give you the highlights. One of the biggest ones that I think is something that we tend to forget is that getting online begins with vendors and store owners. They suggest devices to new users, they help set them up, they onboard users with that experience, and they often sideload apps for those users, so they don't need to download them on their data plan. First-run experiences need to show the benefits of the products immediately. If a user can't figure out at the first glance what your product is and does, then they're not going to use it, and even more so, they might remove it from their device in order to save the storage. One of the biggest and most important things is that users aren't going to update without a good reason. Data costs money, so the way they think of it is that they're going to pay to update your app, and unless it's offering something new that they need, there's not really a good reason for them to do that. This was a big surprise for us, actually. Phones are set to English, even if users don't speak that language. This is really important because the operating system settings often trickle down into apps and even into your browser. So we now know that many users aren't navigating in the language that they're most comfortable with. There's a lot of reasons for this. Some of them are that users like to be perceived as English speakers. But it might also just be that they don't know how to change the setting or that the translation quality is extremely poor. Text-based navigation is a big challenge. This has to do with both language-based interactions and also not having the mental models that have come from desktop. But all of these things together mean that usability is even more important. At a high level, the constraints can be broken down into three things. Cost. Data and storage are a big issue, and both are disproportionately more expensive for these users. Connectivity. It can often be intermittent or unavailable, and users often use data plans, which mean that when they're over, they might be disconnected for a longer period of time. And complexity. This is an umbrella covering all sorts of challenges like language and text input, ramping into new products and new technologies, and also even just the fear and uncertainty of visiting a website if you don't know if it's going to give you a virus, you've never been there before. So in order to address these three big constraints, I have three principles that I'm going to talk about today. The first is that we need to design fast products. For users facing disproportionately higher costs, we need to design products that are fast, that can help them save time and money, because every step costs more. Because connectivity can be intermittent, we have to design products that degrade gracefully and are even offline friendly. And because users are facing higher complexity, our products must be intuitive, even if our users are just coming online for the first time. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how each of these looks and how they can be applied. So I think at this point, we all know that we need to design products which are fast. But this idea takes on entirely new meanings in emerging markets. We also know that data is more expensive and speeds are slower, so every single step costs the user more time and more money. Lower spec devices have limited storage and much lower performance, so considering the performance over just the connection may not be enough. You also need to think about the device the user is accessing that connection on. I have a sad face. We all know, we've all heard that a 1 second in page loading time leads to 11% fewer page views and a 16% decrease in customer satisfaction. Most of us heard the statistic from the Aberdeen group before. It's from the performance of web applications. But this is a new statistic from DoubleClick. And they found that the average load time for mobile sites is 19 seconds over 3G. But 53% of mobile users are abandoning sites that take longer than 3 seconds to load. We need to do better. So it bears repeating that the most important thing is to build performative products. But speed perception can also be affected in your design. For example, progress bars with vertical stripes, backwards animations, and decelerating speeds can be seen as up to 11% faster than constant progress bars. We know that anxiety makes waits seem longer, so it's crucial to give early feedback that something is happening. Uncertainty about how long you're going to wait or unexplained delays can make the whole experience feel slower. So if it's possible to use a determinate indicator, like a progress bar, that's always preferable to an indeterminate indicator, like a spinner. So there are 3 response times thresholds, which are determined by human perception that might be useful in your designs. And since they're determined by human perception, they're quite universal. First, 0.1 seconds for direct manipulation feedback. That's the response time needed for the user to feel like they're doing something on the page. 1 second response time for navigations gives users the feeling that they're navigating freely around a website. 10 seconds is the limit for keeping a user's focus. And if something is going to take more than 10 seconds to complete, it may be better to asynchronously notify them. Okay, I have a fun DIY exercise for the group. So there's one thing that you can do right now to understand how your website is performing for users in emerging markets. It's in Chrome DevTools, obviously. And you can start by taking a look at your site's loading behavior in the DevTools Network tab. At the bottom here, you can read the loading time. For this website, it's 1.02 seconds. But if you select from this drop-down the 2G preset, then you can see how long it would take to load in emerging markets. And you can see that things will often be quite different for these users. This site, for example, took 7.88 seconds to load. And this is a good 2G connection. Things may be even poorer depending on the infrastructure in the local area. So since I'm not a developer, I won't talk today about the things you can do to make your website smaller. I'm going to point, gesture in Bruce's direction and encourage you to take a look at his presentation if you didn't watch it already. But I do want to recommend, I'm going to move on to the next one here. There we go. In Chrome, we're already working on features to help sites perform better in these conditions. One of the features which you might have already seen is Data Saver. It reduces the amount of data used when someone visits a web page. It was also recently updated to save up to 70% of the data per page by removing most images when loading on an extremely slow connection. And after the page is loaded, then the user can tap to show all of the images or just the images that they're interested in. Okay. The second principle is to design products that degrade gracefully over poorer connections and are offline friendly. This is because users are dealing with intermittent connectivity and unmetered connections are few and far between, which means that they're paying for every byte. They also buy prepaid data packages. That's very common. So users may remain disconnected for longer intervals in between finishing one package and buying the next one. Given all of this, we need to think about how to help users bridge the gaps and have a smoother experience. We know from our own statistics that users in emerging markets see the offline dyno significantly more often than users in the rest of the world, which might be charming, but after some time gets frustrating. But we know also that the mobile web is a great solution because it allows users to access your product without downloading the app and storing it on your device. In Chrome, we're taking some steps to make error pages more clear and actionable, and we're also experimenting with allowing users to download pages to make them accessible offline. But we also know that these solutions are not enough. I think most of you probably know where I'm going at this point. You've heard it already a couple times today and yesterday. Enter progressive web apps. It's good, it's getting there. So Paul Lewis already talked today about progressive web apps, so I'll just reiterate a few of the key points in case you missed. But if you missed, go back and watch it. Progressive web apps load fast, even on 2G, even on flaky networks. They allow you, as developers and designers, to offer an offline experience, which is kind of the holy grail. And they also provide web push notifications and allow you to have an icon on the home screen, which for users who navigate in a very tap-oriented way, for whom shortcuts are very compelling, can be really important. One great example of using progressive web apps well is Flipkart, which is India's largest e-commerce website. I'll give the short version of the story. They combined their web presence and native app into a progressive web app, and they saw a threefold increase in time spent on their site, and a 70% increase in conversion. So this is a great technology, and it poses for us as designers new opportunities. It's important that we think about the best ways to make use of it, so we can create new experiences. Another great example of how to make best use of this technology comes from Congo, which is one of the top e-commerce websites in Africa. Their progressive web app detects that the user is offline and has items in their shopping cart, and provides the option of going through an offline checkout experience. This includes allowing users to complete their purchase flow by calling a number, which is perfect. One other nice example that I saw recently, Air Berlin uses a progressive web app for its check-in process, and they let you access your boarding pass even when you don't have a connection. It's another really nice innovation that's super simple and gives users exactly what they need in the right moment. Okay, so it's probably obvious that I'm a bit excited about the potential of progressive web apps. I think I would be remiss if I didn't point out this page. I would definitely recommend that you go and take a look at what's out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing what all of you make. Okay, so there's one other set of insights that I want to share in line with offline friendliness, which is around downloading and sharing files. Downloading and sharing files is a critical use case in emerging markets. Files are currency. We saw that users in emerging markets preferred downloaded media in order to have a smoother experience as compared with streaming. And in order to save time and money, one person would often download a file and then share it directly with their friends. This kind of spreads out the cost. We also saw that all sharing is not equal. Just sending a link means asking that person to spend money to load a page or download a file, which is not very friendly. Another interesting thing was that because data costs more, oh, there we go, that's fun, okay. Because data costs more, users felt that they had paid for downloaded media, that they owned it. This is very different than the way of thinking that we've come to expect. These are other great examples of how our assumptions may unknowingly affect our product design. Again, in Chrome, we saw that downloading was an especially important use case, so we're experimenting with improving downloads and download management. So you can already see some of these experiments in the dev channel in Chrome. So the third principle is to design products that are intuitive for everyone, even if they're coming online for the first time, even if they're navigating in their second or third language, even if they're uncomfortable or afraid of browsing the web or downloading new apps. In our research, we saw that new users on mobile may not always have the same mental models as those coming from desktop, but they do have the same needs. Those of you who watched Bruce's talk yesterday saw the video he showed of a user from Pakistan who was unable to use the Google search page on mobile because it wasn't clear to him that he could tap into the search bar to trigger the keyboard. This is another great example of how our assumptions from desktop may make our products unusable for mobile-first users. This is a stat from Ofcom's Smartphone by Default report. It's very interesting. If you have the time, I would strongly recommend reading the full thing. It looked at participants in the UK who access the web primarily or only via their smartphones. It highlights the fact that certain activities are currently just harder to do on smartphones, especially text input or information management. I'm excited about the idea that there's a future in which these things aren't harder to do on smartphones, but we're just not there yet. So this situation should be unacceptable to us. The web has become the main channel for getting things done. And in a world where job applications need to be done online, equal universal access is more important than ever. The core of the problem at the moment is typing-based navigation. In emerging markets, this problem is amplified. Users in countries like India and Indonesia often have their phone's operating system set to English rather than their first language. And users are less likely to be comfortable with search queries, URLs, or skimming bodies of text. When users are typing in their native language, the alphabet may be more complex than English, also causing the complexity of text input to be increased. There's some fun animations here. Overall text input is higher complexity on mobile than on desktop at the moment. In our work, we've seen positive feedback around offering smart suggestions or preloaded choices, which helps users avoid more complex navigations. Remember, every step is time and money. Images are also more universally accessible, so pairing culturally relevant imagery and iconography with text labels may increase the comprehension. Another experiment that we're currently doing in Chrome is looking at ways to make it easier to ramp up and navigate the web, including things like pre-populated suggestions for users in emerging markets. You can also see these experiments in the dev channel. So, before starting to wrap up, I want to come back to basics. The much debated, often cited principle of form follows function is one to remember. You need to use relevant metaphors and avoid falling back on strings and dialogues to communicate. But creating an intuitive experience for users with an experience so different from our own is a very high bar. So how do you know if your product is intuitive? Does anyone know the answer? I heard one person. Louder. Louder. More. Test it with users. I have another presentation where I show a goat face, and the goat face is the face I see when I encourage people to test their products. See, it's like making a when you see this face, push for more user testing. Okay, good. So we design every day. And we often rely on our instincts to know if something is going to be intuitive, and then hopefully we test it. But unfortunately, this process really breaks down when our own experience and assumptions differ so deeply from those of our users. You know, starting with the web on a desktop computer is just fundamentally different than starting on a mobile device, and it's hard for us to know what we don't know. Setting up regular testing with users in emerging markets can be extremely challenging. We know from our own experience. Since this is an incredibly tricky space and a whole talk could be dedicated to it, I'm going to leave that aside for today. But I did want to mention that I've had really good experiences with usertesting.com. I think it's a fairly new startup, but we've been working with them, and you're able to get sort of these user testing videos and audio recordings. You're able to test with prototypes, and you're able just to test with images. There's a lot of flexibility, and they have a pool of users in India that I found to be fairly good. Of course, it's going to skew a little technologically savvy, so if you really want to do broad testing with users from sort of all different circles, then you're going to need to work with a vendor. But yeah, try out user testing. Okay, so to start wrapping things up, we know that cost, connectivity, and complexity are the biggest challenges to consider when designing for users in emerging markets. To address these, we need to design products that are fast, offline friendly, and that degrade gracefully over slow and poor connectivity, and that are intuitive, even for users who are coming online for the first time. What I want to leave you with is this. We changed the way that we work in this industry when we realized that 285 million users in the US alone were unable to navigate the web due to visual impairments. Now we know that more than 1 billion new users will come online on mobile devices for the first time, and that the bar of quality they experience will be lower than the one that we aim to achieve. It's our responsibility and our privilege to help solve these problems that they'll face and bring a new cohort online. Emerging markets are the new accessibility challenge. This means that we need to think about users in emerging markets with every product that we build. We can't think in silos anymore. And we need to remember to challenge and test our assumptions to become truly mobile-first designers and developers. Thank you.